All right. Class 2A rankings this week, week number 6. Here on the Arkansas Sports Network, I'm Carson Ward. This is the ASN Ranking Show. Um, I have a lot of opinions about Class 2A this week. I think it was one of the most interesting weeks we've had in the class so far. Um, of course, this is the class that I know the most about. I'll admit that. Um, but I've got a lot of thoughts this week. Um, I think there's a lot of interesting games, um, and I think that we've got um, a lot of a lot of things that we still don't know about the class. I think that was evident with the McCrory and EPC game, and as well with the Mount Ida versus Conway Christian game uh, this week. Two really competitive games, but also two really just you know interesting games as far as um, how it concerns the playoff race. McCrory was a team coming into this week that we thought um, could end up being one of the favorites for the 2A2 conference, and Mount Ida was not necessarily a team that we saw as a threat down the stretch. And I'll talk about them. I have a lot of thoughts on Mount Ida after their impressive performance against Conway Christian on Thursday. Um, but aside from that, we're just going to go ahead and get into the rankings here. Number one, the Carlisle Bison. Nobody is surprised by this, I'm sure. Um, they were our number one ranked team last week. They jumped Conway Christian. They've been really impressive in the games that they've played, dominating wins over teams like Junction City, Baptist Prep, Drew Central, Des Arc, and then this week over Clarendon. They are the favorite to win that conference, and they're our number one ranked team right now. They're the team with the target on their back. Um, Ty Tanksley continues to play really well. Um, Gavin Davis is a fantastic receiver. Gabe Boyle, a fantastic linebacker. Um, and then Jaden Elliott, great runner. Um, and so a lot of really good things to talk about with Carlisle. Um, but we're going to go ahead and move on to Conway Christian. They survived at home this week over Mount Ida on a 2-point conversion that Mount Ida did not succeed on. If Mount Ida had made that play, um, we'd probably be having a totally different conversation right now, especially around Mount Ida. Um, and I do think that we should be having that conversation around Mount Ida being a contender, and we will in a few minutes. Um, but Conway Christian, um, you know, it wasn't an offensive problem for them. It was, and I mean, it wasn't necessarily a defensive problem. It was just that they don't see a team that runs the ball that effectively and that often um, every game like some of these teams do. I mean, a lot of teams in 2A run the ball a lot, and Mount Ida I think threw like 2 passes the whole game, um, and they were trick plays. So um, Mount Ida is a team that that you've got to watch out for. Conway Christian is a team that I still think has a fantastic shot at winning the state championship this year. Um, it's just, can they stop the run better than they did against Mount Ida on Thursday? If they do, they might be the best team in the class. Now, Carlisle has has they've played some good teams. Conway Christian's played some good teams. It's just been the margin of victory that Mount Ida, or excuse me, that Carlisle has had. That's put them at that number one spot, and then their wins over two top five teams helps as well. Number three, the Mark Tree Indians. They take on the Des Arc Eagles this week in Des Arc. This is going to be an interesting game, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in just a second. Um, but Des Arc, they run the ball a lot. That's what they do. They're a flex bone offense. Mark Tree, they like to run the ball, but they don't run a flex bone or anything like that. It's a spread offense. Kenyon Carter is a fantastic quarterback. The issue is Des Arc has a fantastic front on both sides of the ball. They're big, they're physical, they're used to physical teams, and Mark Tree is a fantastic team, but their front is not their strength, and they've had some difficulty stopping the run the last few years. Um, so it's going to be a really interesting ball game. Um, we're looking forward to that game on Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll talk about it a little bit more with my picks and things like that. Number four, Junction City. They were able to just skirt past Mineral Springs this week. It was 14-14 for a while in the second half, and then end of the game, Corey Larry, I believe, was the one um, that scored the touchdown to win it for Junction City. It was in Mineral Springs, so I'm sure that didn't help. But Junction City is still a really good football team. They've got a lot of really talented players. I still think that they are one of, if not the most athletic team in the state, and I'll continue to say that every week until they prove me otherwise. I think that's a good reason to have them ranked in the top five. Um, Coach Ball does a fantastic job. He's got his team ready every week. They just have to come out and execute. Um, and I think that once they start, executing the way that Coach Ball wants them to execute, um, they might be unstoppable. I mean, they've just got to work out some of the issues they have, and sometimes with a team that talented, it's hard to figure out where to spread the ball around and things like that. It looked like Dominique Grimes, as talented as he is, he's not going to be able to carry the offense by himself. That he's got to get some help. Um, but outside of that, Junction City still a top five team, still a very athletic group. Going to be hard to play them, especially at Junction City come playoff time. Um, they would still be my personal favorite to win that conference, the 2A3. And I really thought that conference was going to be much tougher than it's turned out to be. It's still a tough conference. I still think it's tougher than the 2A4. Um, but it's going to be an interesting couple weeks for Junction City to see how they play in conference. They could end up with an undefeated conference schedule if Mineral Springs turns out to be the second best team in that conference. Um, right now, it's looking like Dirks could be the second best team in that conference, and we'll get to them in just a second. Um, but for now, we're going to talk a little bit more about number five, Des Arc. Uh, Des Arc's physical group. I haven't seen a whole lot of them this year, to be honest. Um, but they've got a good football team. Struggled against Carlisle, um, but they came out and played really well against Earl. I'll talk a little bit about the common opponent that Mark Tree and Des Arc have had in the Earl Bulldogs once we get to that game breakdown. Um, but just you know, both of those both of those teams going to be a great ball game on Friday, and we'll talk about them a little bit later as well. Number six, Dirks. Dirks is a team that I think has looked more and more impressive every week. They beat Spring Hill 42-14 this week. Spring Hill has struggled in their transition from 8-man to 11-man football after having a very successful run in 8-man last season. Um, One of the things that I took away from that game is that Dirk's offense can put up some points. Struggled against 3A Falk in week 0. Um, that's just kind of been the common denominator with all of the 2A teams. They've just struggled against the higher tier 3A teams this season. And then Dirks has rattled off 4 straight wins since their loss in week 0. Um, and so Dirks is going to be a team to watch out for. They've bounced back. They look like a really solid team. They put up points every week. Going to be hard to stop them come playoff time. Number 7, East Poinsett County. Um, East Poinsett County got a big win over McCrory. They needed that win in conference, um, and they still look like a threat. Last season, um, they made it to the state title game. Ended up coming up short against Bigelow, um, but they're still a really solid team. They're going to be physical. Uh, East Poinsett County is one of the toughest places to play in the state, and they just came out and they showed that they were going to be the better team on Friday night than McCrory. McCrory kept it close. It was a 10-point ball game, 22-12. Um, but still a two-score victory for East Poinsett County. And McCrory was a team that I think a lot of people were very high on coming into the game, and East Poinsett County ended up coming in and taking one for themselves. I think they're still a really talented team. Do I think that they are um, in there in the top five yet? No, I don't. I don't think they've shown enough to prove that. They did take some losses to some 3A teams, and I think that has affected um, where they stand. But I do think that they are a really, really solid group at the moment. Number eight, Mount Ida. I've got a lot to say about Mount Ida, so um, I want to start off with Ben Woodfield. Ben Woodfield so far has looked like one of, if not the best running backs in the state, in the class. Um, if you want to list Dominique Grimes as a running back, you can throw him in there. Brady DeMarcus and Aaron Lovelace both having fantastic seasons at Conway Christian. They're contenders. Jaden Elliott doing well. At Carlisle, and of course Davion Bell at Des Arc, and I could keep throwing around names for hours. Of course, it's impossible to forget about T.J. Hodges at Mark Tree. But from a numbers perspective, Ben Woodfield is up there with some of the best in the class. Now, talent wise, T.J. Hodges is probably the best, but he accounted for all of Mount Ida's touchdowns in one way or another. All their points, really, because he's their extra point kicker as well. So one way or another, he scored every point for Mount Ida against Conway Christian. That defense is really good. They couldn't stop Conway Christian to save their life defensively. Um, Jaron Thomas had 5 total touchdowns as well. Um, but they're still one of the most talented teams in the class. It would not surprise me in the least if they made a run to the semifinals. They're that kind of good. Um, and to keep up with Conway Christian at home, uh, to make it a stand on the final play, um, that's really interesting, to me, because Mount Ida is a perennial power or has been in the class. And in talking to Coach White in the offseason, um, he was excited about this group because there were so many returning starters. He said, if they put it together, they could be something special. And um, they they look like they could be something special. Um, he also, you know, talked a lot about how this group is still kind of young and they're still kind of learning things, but it looks like they had a tremendous offseason because they came out explosive, they came out ready to play, they converted on third down and fourth down when they needed to, um, and that offense was hard to stop. Conway Christian got an onside kick um, to open the second half. Otherwise, that score might be totally different. Mount Ida is a very fundamentally sound football team, offensively especially. Defensively, they got some things they need to fix. If they run into a really high offensive powered team, like a Mark Tree or a Carlisle or a Dirks, they might struggle a little bit. But their only loss until Thursday night was against a 3A team, Jessieville, and it was a 3-point loss. This team has what it takes to make a deep playoff run. Um, I was very impressed by what I saw on Thursday night. Um, they've got a lot of really, really talented players. They have a big offensive line that's gonna pancake some people downfield, and they're gonna clear some spaces for their backs. And that's how Mount Ida football has been since Coach White has gotten there. Um, and they're just you know big, physical. They're gonna run the ball until you make them stop, and usually teams aren't very good at making them stop. Um, and so Mount Ida, they're going to be a team to watch out for. I think they're the second best team in the 2A1 conference for sure. That's the way we have it listed in our top 10. They're the second best team in that conference, in my opinion, for sure. I haven't watched a whole lot of Bigelow this year. I know they lost a lot of production. They took care of Hector pretty easily on Friday, but I do think that Mount Ida is the second most talented, second and the second best team in the conference aside from Conway Christian this season. Another thing that I wanted to talk about with that game on Thursday was anytime that Mount Ida and Conway Christian get together, no matter how good either team is, it's a close game that comes down to the last couple or the final play. Um, the last time they played, it came down to a 2 point conversion that Conway Christian didn't convert. It was in the playoff, deep in the playoffs, um, and they sent Conway Christian home that day. And they looked they looked fantastic. They looked just very similar to that team that they had a deep playoff run. They look very similar to that team on that in that game on Thursday. Number 9, Poen. Um, Colt Barrett. He's he's their guy. He's gonna be the end all be all for that team. It looks like. Struggled a little bit at the start of the game against Hampton, but ended up pulling away and winning 34-14. Hampton's a team that's very improved. I think Poen is too. I think they're really good. They've got a lot of really good weapons for Colt Barrett to throw to, and Coach Vic Barrett uh, is a really good coach. I think that if they're able to put Colt Barrett in positions to win football games, he's going to win them football games. But that's up to the supporting cast around him, and um, I think they're the second best team in the 2A4. Um, Obviously, the 2A2 is the best conference again this year with how many teams they have um, in the rankings. But I do think that Bowen's the second best team in the 2A4. Number 10, McCrory. They lost to East Poinsett County on Friday night. First loss of the season for McCrory. There's only two undefeated teams left in Class 2A, Carlisle and Conway Christian. That's why they're 1-2. Um, really, really interesting situation for McCrory because now you have to, if you want to get home field advantage, you have to both win out and hope that East Poinsett County loses 2 games. I do think that McCrory, if the pieces fall right, they could get some decent home field advantage in the playoffs. But I do think it's going to take a lot of dominoes falling the right way for the Jaguars. All right, going to get into some games here, game picks and games to watch this week. Going to start out with Mark Tree and Des Arc. That's the game to watch. Number 5 versus number 3 in our rankings. Probably a top 5 matchup anywhere you look. Um, I have Des Arc winning this game. Not only because it's at Des Arc, but because I don't think that Mark Tree can match the physicality that Des Arc is going to bring to that game on Friday. I think that uh, Mark Tree has the athletes to compete, but they don't have the physicality. Now, if TJ Hodges comes out and just decides to go bananas, that's going to be hard to stop. But I have the offensive line has to give him time to make something happen. Same thing with Kenyon Carter. I don't know if Mark Tree's offensive line can keep up, and I don't think their defense is going to be able to keep up with the physicality of Des Arc. I'm going to pick Des Arc to win in that game, and what some might call an upset pick. But I think that Des Arc wins this game and moves to 5-1. Um, Want to look at their matchup, both of those teams matching up with Earl. Now, head to head, or similar matchups don't always determine the outcome of a game. But Des Arc beat Earl 44-8. No struggle in that game at all. And Mark Tree beat Earl 24-20. Um, it's just it's a it's something to watch. Um, Now, does that translate 100% of the time? Like I said, absolutely not. But I do think it's an interesting statistic that needs to be looked at. Cross County versus East Poinsett County. This is a game that could decide some seeding in the 2A2 conference. East Poinsett County hosts Cross County. I'm going to pick East Poinsett County to get the victory in this one, and I don't think it's going to be extremely close. Cross County's probably improved from where they were at the beginning of the season, but I think that East Poinsett County gets a win pretty handily here. Earl versus Mariana. I think Mariana's defense has improved for sure. Offensively, I'm really not sure what they look like, but from a numbers standpoint, it looks like their defense has improved. Um, Held Mark Tree to 22 points, held Des Arc to 13 points. They play Earl this week. I do think it's going to be a decent chance for them to get a win, but I do think that Earl will pull out the victory um, in a low-scoring game. Mineral Springs versus Foreman. Mineral Springs off to a 2-3 start. Slow start for Mineral Springs, especially compared to last season. I do think they get the victory against Foreman this week at Foreman. The talent gap is just too big there. I'm going to pick Mineral Springs and the Hornets to get the victory in this game. Gurdon versus Junction City. I think this game is going to be more interesting than people think. Gurdon's a team that runs the ball very well, and they know their offense inside and out. Um, Junction City has struggled to stop the run a little bit this season, um, but I'm going to have to pick Junction City in a game that I think is going to be closer than most people expect, just because of Junction City's athletes. They're better than most if not all of the teams in the conference this season. And like I said, if Junction City can get rolling, they're going to be difficult to stop. Izard County versus McCrory. Don't think there's um, too much of a contention here on who's going to win this game. I'm going to pick McCrory to win in this one. Spring Hill versus Lafayette County. This game could end up being close, but I'm going to pick Lafayette County to get the victory and move to 500 on the season. Magazine and Mount Ida. Mount Ida will roll in this game. I guarantee you, Mount Ida is going to have a very good game on Friday against Magazine. Mount Ida's just they're very very good, and I'm telling you right now they're gonna make a good playoff run this season. This is one of those classic Mount Ida football teams that knows what they're doing. They're running the ball really well. I believe their quarterback Kane McCullough is still injured. If he comes back, they could be even more dangerous. Murfreesboro versus Dirks. This game is at Dirks. Murfreesboro usually has a really solid defense, and Dirks is putting up a lot of points this season. If Dirks can win this game, that pretty much solidifies them as the second best team in the conference behind Junction City. And then it's between them and Junction City for a conference championship. Um, I'm going to pick Dirks to get the victory in a close game because it's at Dirks. If it were at Murfreesboro, which is a tough place to play, I would pick Murfreesboro. But I do think it's a very close game. Uh, I think that Dirks is going to get the victory in this one, um, in a game that will either have a lot of points or very little points. There's not going to be a whole lot of in between. Baptist Prep and England. It's at England. Baptist Prep has struggled since starting 3-0, 0-2 in conference play, losses to Bearden and Carlisle. I'm going to pick England to win. Now, if Baptist Prep gets the win, they're in a pretty good position to get the 4 spot in the playoffs. It's going to be between them and Hampton. Um, I think that the 3 best teams in the conference this season, in that conference in the 2A4, are Carlisle, Poen, and Hazen in that order. We're going to learn a lot about those teams down the stretch more than we really know now. But I'm going to pick England to get the victory over Baptist Prep. Clarendon and Bearden. Um, I think that Clarendon's going to have to play a really good game to win. It's at Bearden. I'm going to pick Bearden to get the victory in this game. I think that Bearden's going to roll and get a pretty solid victory. Bigelow versus Mountain Pine at Mountain Pine. Mountain Pine may be one of the more underrated teams. They put up 42 points on Johnson County West Side last week. Their offense can be explosive. Um, However, they did take a substantial loss to Hector. Bigelow dominated Hector last week. I'm going to pick Bigelow to get the victory on the road. And Bigelow, if they can beat Mount Ida, that would mean a conference championship matchup with Conway Christian at the end of the season. Um, it's going to be a very intense matchup whenever they do play Mount Ida. Of course, that's a rematch from the playoffs last season, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I'm very excited about how those matchups could shake up down the stretch. Um, but Bigelow should move uh, to 4-2 this weekend. Conway Christian versus Johnson County West Side. Don't think there's going to be a whole lot of issue with me picking Conway Christian. It's at Johnson County West Side, um, but they they just they aren't as talented as Conway Christian in any way. They're also a little bit banged up with injury, um, and so I think that Conway Christian gets the victory big time. Poen and Hazen. If Hazen can manage to pull off the victory, it could very well set up a conference championship matchup um, with Carlisle at the end of the season. Um, to me, it would then be, I think that the hardest part of Hazen's schedule is behind them. Um, if they can beat Poen this week at home, they're set up in a really, really good spot for playoff positioning. JJ Pinkney's an electric quarterback. He just doesn't have a whole lot of support. I think that Hazen loses this week. I think Poen gets the victory, but it's going to be a razor thin margin. Mountainburg versus Hector. Games at Hector. Mountainburg does not look very good this season. Hector's still trying to learn where the pieces are going to go with a young football team. I'm going to pick Hector to get the victory in this one. Hampton versus Carlisle, our last matchup to talk about. Carlisle is going to roll big time in this game. Hampton is improved, but the game's at Carlisle. Going to be tough for Hampton to get a whole lot going against a really, really talented Carlisle Bison football team. Well, that's going to wrap it up. I'm really excited to talk about the rest of the classes for our ranking show this week. But for now, this has been the Class 2A Ranking Show. I'm Carson Ward. You're watching the Arkansas Sports Network. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Hit the notification bell if you want to know whenever we post a new video. And go ahead and follow us on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We have content coming out all the time. Just go ahead, go follow us over there so you can stay up to date on all of the high school sports and college sports in Arkansas. We cover high school sports, we cover the Razorbacks. Go ahead and follow us. Follow our Arkansas Sports Network page on Facebook and our Arkansas Sports Network High School page if you're a fan of the Razorbacks and Arkansas high school sports. But for now, I'm Carson Ward for the ASN Ranking Show, signing off.